Right, it's past 12 o'clock, so I think we'll get underway. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm John Staniforth, and I'm the Head of Professional Firms at Kingston Smith. And it's my pleasure to welcome you all to today's Managing Partner panel on the subject of what does 2021 have in store for professional firms. So without further ado, I'm going to ask each of our expert panelists to introduce themselves and the firms which they manage. And I'm not being biased here at all, but the way they appear on my screen, I'm going to start off with Maureen, first of all, please.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Maureen Penfold. I'm the Managing Partner at Kingston Smith, hence John's biasness of coming towards me on that. And I think most of you probably know who we are. We're effectively a top 15 chartered accountants and business advisors, and hopefully act with lots of you in the audience today.
Thanks, Maureen. And can I have Ed next, please?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Edward O'Rourke. I'm the CEO of Ashton's Legal. We're an East Anglian law firm, about £21 million turnover business and 350 staff.
Thanks, Ed. And turning to Alan next, please.
Hi, everybody, and thank you for the introduction, John. I'm an architect and the founding partner of BPTW for nearly 40 odd years now. Having set up the practice 30 years ago, lots of experience in regeneration work, working with diverse and disadvantaged communities. And I head up areas of work that are mainly to do with sport these days around bids and new initiatives. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. And last but not least, turning to Paul.
Yeah, good afternoon. Thank you, John. Yes, I'm Paul Miller, Managing Partner at Calford Seaton. We're a multidisciplinary practice, architects, engineers, surveyors, working across a number of sectors, but historically it was started with residential, and it's still a big part of our business. We're about 25 million turnover as a business, and we have 6 offices employing around just over 300 staff.
Thank you very much, Paul. So we've got an hour today, so plenty of time to get your questions in. Before I'm going to kick off with some questions that I prepared myself, but I would encourage everybody on today's webinar to please post your burning questions that you'd like our panel to answer using the Q&A function within Zoom, and I'll try my best to keep checking the function and to ask your questions as we proceed within the next hour. But to get things going, get the conversation going, I'm going to pose my first question to Ed. And my question is kind of, obviously the panel is all the same compared to the panel event we had back in June, and the conversation was all very much about how firms were coping during the pandemic. And I think it's fair to say that one of the few benefits that we've all seen from the pandemic and the ensuing lockdown is the increased use of agile working, which I think is here to stay. So given that, what are your plans for future use of office space, and what progress? I'd be interested to hear what progress you've made against those plans that you've put in place. So how far down the line are you into introducing those measures for your office space? So that question's for Ed, please.
Thank you. Yes. Well, as you say, June seems like a long time ago now, and back then I was talking about what we all thought I think was going to be a change in the use of the way we use offices going forward, and we were about to do a survey of our staff as to how they felt they would want to work. We had the results of that survey in at the back of August. 75% of our staff wanted to work at least 2 or 3 days a week from home. 15% wanted to work fully from home, and 10% wanted to work fully from the office. So we've doing a redesign of our Norwich office off the back of that survey. And our Norwich office lease was due up in September. We've renewed the lease, but we've now redesigned, and the fit out's taking place as we speak right now. And what we're creating is very much more of a meeting and greeting place, a drop-in zone, rather than a Monday to Friday 9 to 5 type environment. There will be desk space for everybody who wants to go and work in the office, but we're anticipating that the office won't be 100% occupied, not that it ever was before, but even less so going forward. So a lot more sort of coffee areas, breakout areas, quiet rooms for those who do need a bit of peace and quiet, but rather than less of the large size desk which, as we did the clear out of the Norwich office recently, we started to realise the amount of paraphernalia that people sort of accumulate around their desks as they sort of build a home from home. So we'll have less of that. So we've got 4 sort of our own offices. We also have a serviced office up in Leeds. Norwich is the first one we're doing as a trial. We're also rerunning our survey right now, because I'm conscious that the survey that concluded at the back end of August concluded after a nice time in the garden, drinking the cocktails in the summer sunshine. Doing a survey again now might mean that we get a slightly different skew to the results in terms of how much people want to spend the time at home versus in the office, particularly as they've had to sort of heat their houses and cope with the dark, gloomier days. So we're running the survey again just to sense check that, and then we will look to roll forward further plans with our other offices, depending upon how we assess the rollout of the Norwich office has gone. So we're moving forward with sort of creating a more agile work arrangement, effectively saying to the staff that they don't need to work from anywhere in particular. It's work from where you feel best, providing you have regard to your colleagues and your clients.
Thank you, Ed. Thanks very much for that. Anything that any of the rest of our panellists would like to add in terms of plans for office space going forward?
I'll just come in, John, if I may. So I think that point about asking your staff is absolutely crucial, and I echo Ed's point that a winter lockdown has a very different effect psychologically to a summer lockdown. We're seeing quite a few people struggling with working from home for a variety of reasons, particularly younger staff, and the issues around developing younger staff and integrating them into teams. I think that's fairly commonly acknowledged across our industry. But what I think is fair to say is that this pandemic, which has crept up on us, I suppose, has caused us all to look differently at everything that we do. And I think it's going to have the same effect on offices as air conditioning had when it was originally brought in. Air conditioning, you'll recall, created open plan, deep plan offices with lots of people in open spaces, pushed together in some cases. I think we're going to see a return to more cellular type situations. We're going to need that for some privacy arrangements. Those Teams calls are quite disruptive, especially if 2 people are trying to have them next door to each other. And we're seeing that already with the limited number of people that are coming into our office already. And then, of course, there's the challenges of working from home. It's not just the noise of the landscape gardener, John, that you're suffering from today, but it's even the household noises and disruption of those lucky enough to have a spare room. And for those that are sharing a kitchen table with 3 other people to try and work, especially with large equipment, it's near impossible. So I think the death of the office has been forecast much too soon. And I think we will see from a social point of view, the reason people come to London especially, a desire to come back into the office.
Just add something there, John. I think there's some really good points that have been made, but of course the other thing to look at is the positive effects. So people not having to commute, their well-being in terms of, they're up for their work much sooner, in terms of it being invigorated, having had that turmoil of being delayed because of, all the local roadworks and all the rest of it. So I do think there'll be a blend. I do think people's mood will be, I'd be interested to hear some feedback, Ed, on your survey, because I think the dark days of the winter, and also the fact that, these situations being forced on us, so being told to stay indoors is a little bit different to having a choice. And I think when we're given the choice to be able to possibly go into the office one day or not, I think maybe we'll feel a lot better for people. And I think that's why that flexibility will need to be there going forward.
Yeah, we're certainly seeing that flexible piece that you've all spoken about. I still think that our driving seems to be very much, even though it's in sort of some of the winter questions we've asked, people still want that agile hybrid of part in the office and part not. They want choice. I think the challenge for all of us is when you've got teams that are a really mixed bag is making sure they all want to come in on one day and not the other day. And I think that's something we're really trying to work hard now to look, how do we make sure that when people do come to the office, they get the right experience of collaboration to go forward with. But I think it's I'm not sure I see the cellular coming back, but I certainly don't believe the office is dead. People will want to come because in the end, we're social beings and we like to have fun with each other.
Thank you very much, everybody. I think we'll move on because I'm seeing the questions pouring in, so which is great. I'll move on to my second question, which is first of all starting off with Paul. So, Paul, in your experience, and it's kind of turning more to people and salaries, I suppose, effectively. In your experience, have you seen firms postponing or deferring salary reviews during 2020? And are they still on hold, or have firms generally committed to reviewing salaries this year? What's your experience?
Bit of a mixed bag. I guess our situation is a good starting point. So we do our review process in April every year. We'd already gone through the process of deciding what we were going to do back in April 20, and then obviously with COVID impacting on us, we took the decision, regrettably, to defer the salaries at that time. But it was very much seen as a deferral on the basis that we needed to see, how things would pan out. Thankfully, the business has performed well, and we've all adapted extremely well to the changes, and somehow or other, businesses carried on pretty much as usual, such that we felt in a strong position to unlock the deferral, which we did in October. Quite a positive reaction, well, very positive reaction. Much was around surprise, really, because I think people just assumed it wouldn't happen. And part of that probably is because some of our competitors, other friends, families working in other industries, probably more going the other way, where there were deferments, there were still an uncertainty about when they would be unlocked, and dare I say, some instances, salary reductions, and perhaps even worse instances where even more stronger action was necessary. I think for us, it was important to send that strong message out to people. We've always been open in our approach. We've communicated throughout the whole pandemic, telling people how we're doing. And it would have been wrong, I think, to give people the positive news that, we were doing okay and then still defer the salaries. So I think, it had a very positive impact. But I do know from feedback from the network that I deal with, that probably we're in the minority being less than 50%. I wouldn't like to put a number on it, really. I just know that probably more people deferred or didn't do salary increases or reductions than what we did. So, yeah, I think it's vital to demonstrate. I mean, for us, it's a people business. We have to look after our people. We value them, their commitment. We certainly wouldn't have got to this point without their hard effort. And so it's only right that they should be rewarded for that and recognised for it.
Thank you, Paul. And again, I'd like to open that up to the other three panellists, if anything you'd like to add from your own firm's experience.
We were in the position where we do a May and November review. So just as pandemic hit and we went home on the 17th of March, we were just starting our sort of May review. And we were in it was quite such a traumatic time of the unknown, really, I think, is when we last all met going into that. So we did hold back in May, really, and did quite a limited number of promotions, basically. And then the November one, we still held back a bit because we hadn't seen quite the recovery at that point, and we did a few more promotions. And now we're set going into our May one in a really feeling, we've got to bring our people, as you said, with us and reward them for all the hard work. So I think, and also I think the market, I don't know about all of the different professions, but certainly in ours, we're starting to see it start to build up now, and those headhunters are calling all our people. So I think a people first policy is a good one for any professional firm.
Thanks, Maureen. Alan?
Yeah, I was just going to add a point there that the pandemic is also, like Paul has said about working from home and that flexible working, I think it's also led to some people thinking about how they want to work in the future. So we've lost a couple of people who decided that the future commute, even if it's one day a week or one day a month even, they'd like to be working more locally to where they live. And I think you might see that happening a little bit. So, one example was someone up in Scotland, somebody else over in Essex. At the same time, we've taken the opportunity to review when we do salary reviews. We had a rather arbitrary date in some ways, somewhere in the middle of the financial year, and we've moved it forward now to April as a conscious effort to sort of recognise in that period between January and March, when we can focus our efforts on the future, what that might look like going forward. So, sorry. One of the pleasures of working from home, John. Those two.
They're keen to get hold of you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
over to Ed and others.
Okay, I think I'll move on to my next question, which is one I'm going to start off with Maureen on. So, as ever with professional firms, technology is always a kind of hot potato of a topic, and dare I say it, from my perspective over the last 20 years or so, it's probably going to sound a little bit negative, but things never seem to quite happen as quickly as people predict. It's always a bit longer. So my question for Maureen is how do you see disruptive technology, including AI, impacting on the professional firm sector over the next year or two?
Well, I mean, I think technology has certainly been held out as the panacea to solve all of our problems in professional services firms. And it's hard, I think, to argue that the role of technology and AI and all of that won't have its part to play, whether it's on, dealing with our sort of productivity gap or actually the insight we can provide to our clients. So it will do there. But I think at present, though, really, technology has only been used to augment the services that we're providing to people. And maybe that's because amongst us as professions and our leadership of our professional bodies, maybe there's not enough investment going into what can really be good that would maybe help drive that technology forward, and how that can really play a part in the disruptions of our business models. Maybe we don't want to, maybe the professions don't, but I think it's to come. An example really in terms of that is really looking at what blockchain and distributed ledger technologies are looking at, and they're probably going to present opportunities for all of us in the future. Currently, an example, which I think is quite a good one, is that there's as part of its two-phase digitization program to work out how innovative technologies can improve and make the house buying process smoother and quicker, one probably most people would quite like at the moment. HM Land Registry are actually working with some specialists to explore the possible benefits of blockchain for the property market. Now, I think there are barriers to that, and it's coming. And probably one of the biggest ones is everybody's cynicism about cryptocurrency. But if you see what's going on in the market and the changes that are going on in that crypto market, I think it may not be, we might think it's years away, but I think it could come sooner. So I think there is disruption there really of where that could be going. Another one that's really quite close in terms of our profession is how AI has been utilised in enhancing the audit process that we undertake. It's really helping us to manage and deep dive into large data sets and really pull out those anomalies that then we have to follow up. So it really is starting to impact that. Data analytics, digital technology, it isn't actually replacing our people, but it is actually augmenting them of what they do. It's allowing us to really sort of dive into big sets of data and actually get out information that we can then advise on, as well as from an audit perspective. Basically, we can get to the nub of a problem quicker. We can use it, and it is certainly being used in terms of some of the more mundane and compliance processes that maybe us accountants have to go through, to actually maybe do the more interesting ends of our jobs and pull out information and insight. And that's certainly helping. But what it's really impacting on is the skill sets our people are going to need. We are going to have to develop our skill sets into that world. And who knows where those disruptions to our business models can go. And I think some of the digital technology is going to have an impact on us all, and actually could perhaps maybe even disrupt that billable hour proposition that maybe many of us have to come. So it's a journey.
Thank you. And anybody else from our panel would like to add any thoughts on disruptive technology?
I'm not sure it's entirely disruptive, but collaborative tools have been in our industry for a little while now and have been increasingly starting to take over. So we call it BIM, Building Information Modeling. And we're sharing those models with other organisations, with them inputting the information. We do clash detection around the services, the structures, and so on. And that sort of collaborative working is something which has happened remotely, if you like, for some time now, and is something which I'm sure is going to accelerate. But I totally echo the point about different skill sets needed. And we've got people in our organisation today that 10 years ago we didn't even have titles for, because they're now roles that we need to perform. We've got document controllers, we've got BIM managers, we've got BIM coordinators. There's a whole host of IT-based skill sets that, you know, when we first started thinking about computers with the old Amstrads, you know, it was a different world altogether. And we've seen those changes in relatively short time. But what you still miss enormously is that collaboration of physical sharing of ideas around a table. You know, and we still use soft pencils, I'm pleased to say, and tracing paper. So long may that continue.
Thanks, Harm.
Yeah, I was just going to observe, I think most industries, that when they get disrupted, normally get disrupted from the outside rather than from the inside. And I think that's the biggest challenge for us as managers, is to recognise that and try and deal with that. And one of the concerns I have is that we had a massive uptake in doing things differently in the early days of the lockdown. And it's maintaining that momentum to ensure that we are keeping a pace with the disruptors that are coming into our marketplace from external, rather than, you know, so often the external people come in with the new ideas and a clean sheet of paper, and the people who are already incumbent find it very hard and difficult to move away from their old practices. And that's something we must be alive to when these technologies start to pick up, because they are on their way, and you know, they will disrupt our businesses. You've just got to make sure that we're part of that journey rather than part of history.
I think that's very right, Ed. I think who knows? I mean, we could well see a future where some of the tech giants might come into the professional firms world. So they will definitely provide pretty stiff competition. Hopefully, we'll still be able to differentiate ourselves in terms of the quality of the advice, but it is certainly a risk. Okay, I'd like to move on to Alan next, please. So, question for Alan is: have you revisited your business development strategy and value proposition over lockdown? And linked to that, have you started to target more refined markets, or are you happy to tender for all work? So have you become more selective, or are you kind of quite happy to kind of tender for all work opportunities that come your way?
It's one of those questions that's going to bite you tomorrow, because everything I say will be wrong by tomorrow. But interestingly, our world has not been quite as disrupted as we feared it would. You know, we had the initial lockdown of sites closing and the big furlough issues that happened, and a big kind of reflection then on what that might mean going forward. And we are seeing competitors of ours who've had turnover drop of 20% or more in some cases. So that's certainly been a factor, because there's been a real challenge around fees and the competitiveness there, and some really rock bottom fee quotes, which some clients are accepting, unfortunately, which puts pressure on all of us. It puts pressure on salaries and the quality of the work that you're doing. But in terms of the wider business development function, obviously we've shifted from a person to person in the same room networking type opportunities to this sort of version we've got here today. And we've been fortunate that there's a number of platforms that we're very actively involved with, as our polls practice in our similar areas of operation. Some of those are regional, like Kent Design, who've been very active, less so up in Cambridge with Cambridge Forum for Construction Industry. That's been a little bit slow off the mark. But in London, there's been a real kind of push with Future of London in particular, entities like the Housing Forum. And that's been an opportunity for us to meet new people, albeit in a rather digital fashion, but it's a platform for contacts that has really flourished, I would say, in this pandemic situation. And I don't think is going to change going forward. So we've also shifted our focus around networking. So we've realized that there are some areas where actually you spend a lot of time, but actually doesn't deliver a lot in terms of business development. It might be useful for learning platforms, but less so for new work opportunities. One of the big shifts in our world, and I'm sure this will happen across the board, is a real emphasis on social value. You know, it's no longer just about what you do in terms of the output of your work, but it's that wider benefit into communities that I touched on earlier in terms of our work with disadvantaged communities in particular. And it's something we've cared very deeply about, but is now getting measured quite, well, I'd say quasi-scientifically. Paul might have a better view on that one, but you know, the whole issues around diversity and inclusion are really fundamental to the way we operate today, and we're seeing a lot of questions around that being probing into the way we do things. And of course, asking our clients, you know, getting feedback, and that direct contact route is extremely important. And it's so easy, I think, when you've got a large number of clients to forget some, and they quickly forget you if you forget them. And the last thing I want to say is industry recognition. Since we met, we've been very fortunate in securing the Housing Design Awards success at the end of last year. And that's been a real platform to promote the business, and that sort of external attestation of doing what you do well, I think can't be ignored, especially when everything is digital. And that goes to individuals, such as a colleague of ours who was Architectural Technologist of the Year, through to practice-wide recognition for things like your behaviours in the organisation and the way you manage people. I hope that answers the question, John.
Very much so, and congratulations on the award.
Can I just come in on that point? Just to elaborate on something Alan said, I mean, by way of these sorts of sessions, something which we've been working hard on is those sort of technical updates. We've been doing stuff around the BIM that Anna mentioned earlier, the Building Safety Bill, obviously the fire cladding issues. These are things that, you know, our client contacts want to hear about. They want to know, you know, what legislation has been introduced, what changes are being made. So, and, you know, these sort of vehicles have been really, really popular. So we've had a big uptake on some of the webinars that we've been hosting. And I think people like the convenience of it. So they haven't got to travel for an hour, haven't got to travel back. It's not a big disruption to their day. They can, you know, fit in an hour's update. And dare I say, for those in the professional world, it's fantastic CPD as well. So it ticks many boxes. And it is a chance still to network, as Alan said. You can't underestimate the need just to keep in touch with people and all sorts of things, you know, like-minded. I mean, when Alan and I meet, there's always things that we share, you know, it's that kind of thing. We can all help each other, moving our businesses forward.
Thank you very much. We're about halfway through, and as I say, the questions have been flooding in, so I think I'm going to dive into those at this juncture. And what I'll try and do is keep the order the same. So I'll start off this next question with Ed. So the first question from our audience is, with COVID to dominate 2021 and potentially beyond, how are firm management avoiding COVID crowding out other priorities? So how are you making sure you concentrate on other priorities rather than still worrying about the pandemic?
I think that's a good question. I think, I don't know about other businesses, but ours now, we've got to a state where this is the sort of new normal, as it were. So certainly in the early days of the pandemic, we were taking our operational team meetings were daily, our management board meetings were weekly, whereas historically they were weekly and bi-monthly. So we wrapped everything up, and all the conversation was how are we going to deal with X, Y, and Z, all related to COVID. I would suggest probably since the end of the first lockdown, we've been looking more then longer term and strategically. The Norwich office refurb was part of that. We were looking at how the changes we were having to implement to deal with the pandemic would also then relate to the way we would work and operate our businesses post-pandemic. So ensuring that changes we put in place weren't just knee-jerk reactions to the immediacy that we needed to deal with, but also had a longer-term value and benefit. So I think probably businesses have already started to adapt to that way of working and thinking. Certainly we have, and you know, a lot of the changes we've now put in place, some of them were changes we already had on the radar. And what happened with the pandemic, of course, it accelerated the appetite to buy into that change at a quicker pace than before. Our consultation period suddenly went down, you know, in duration from months on end to matters of days and weeks. I think all well-run businesses now are focusing on longer term. The pandemic has become part of an everyday life that is no longer as panic inducing as it was in the early days when we were probably all forecasting budgets that were looking horrific. We've come through that. We've seen the fee income held up, etc. And we need to make sure that we're still driving the business forward, not just for the today, but also longer term.
Thank you, Ed. And anything else from the rest of our panel?
Well, I'd wholeheartedly agree with that. I think that the COVID, the first few months, and probably when we all met and spoke last in June, we were just at the sort of turning point of where we'd had things going on weekly. But I think we've obviously got to deal with whatever comes out through that. But it now has become sort of, that's part of the normal. It's really what happens next. And I really, really agree with Ed. I think it's been a fantastic opportunity as managing partners, I think, to change our businesses where we may have had to drag a few people kicking and screaming through change in the past. We've been able to just go over the edge and get out there. So now is the time, I think, to really drive that change through in our businesses. And I think it's really quite an exciting opportunity rather than worrying about COVID, really. It is, we've got to take count of it in our businesses. But
thank you, Maureen. I'm going to move on to our next question. Start off with Paul, if that's okay. Do you expect Lena costs to continue for most professional firms after the COVID crisis has ended?
Very interesting question. Partially, yes. I think there's some real good lessons we've learned as a business. It's about that efficient way of working, and we've already introduced some innovative solutions that maybe we should have been doing a few years ago, but only now being forced upon us, so we sort of bitten the bullet and got on with it. I think it's a blend. There's some things we are missing, as Alan said, that interaction with clients. So, the activity relating around that, I do think we'll need to, increase. But, other things like travel time, I mean, our travel costs obviously have gone down significantly as a business. We're very peripatetic in our nature. We've got guys and girls, I hasten to add, going, client meetings, design meetings, project meetings, site meetings. There's a lot of time being taken up, and we found ways around that. And it's not to say we will never go to site again. Of course, we have to continue the site inspections, but there's other ways to do these things, and it's a blend again. And I think it would be a travesty if we didn't take some of those opportunities to become more efficient. And dare I say, from an environmental sustainability point of view, it had a very positive impact. Our carbon emissions count, I know, is dramatically down. Why shouldn't we learn from some of those lessons and at least continue to benefit from some of those to a certain degree anyway?
Thank you, Paul. And again, happy to open that up to the rest of our panel if you'd like to add anything on the thought of Lena costs.
I think the only danger from our perspective is to avoid the mission creep. I agree with everything that Paul said. And I think there are some really good things that have come out of this pandemic, such as the ability to have meetings remotely rather than having to travel to them. For instance, I accept that, as again Paul said, we will want to get out to some meetings physically, face to face. It's just ensuring we don't have that mission creep, that everybody sort of starts to do that at the same time, and suddenly before you know it, your travel expenses are back up where they were pre-pandemic. It's a good time now to remind people of the habits they've got into and to keep some of those good habits still alive.
Indeed. Thank you, Ed. All right, I'll move on to our next question. So it says, one of my clients was the managing partner of a large regional law firm for 8 years. He used to say that it was like dog years. Every year seemed like 7. Would you agree? So that's starting off with Maureen.
No, I mean, obviously, in any role, and I think a managing partner role, the bit that's probably more the challenging of managing a partnership is there. But I think, you only do these roles. Yes, some days may feel like a week, but that's not every day. And I think it's an exciting time to be managing great people. I mean, I love people businesses. It's all diverse, different and challenging. So no, I'm certainly not in the 7 years a year category, because if I was, I would be so old, it would be terrible.
Thank you, Maureen. And again, happy to open that question up to the rest of our panel. If not, we'll, Ed? No.
I was just going to say, this year seems to have flown by rather than being 7 years. This 1 year, has really been probably the fastest year in terms of the managing experience. I think probably because everything's happened so fast, certainly in the early parts of the pandemic, that probably the reverse is true for the year just gone.
Yeah, I'd echo that. I mean, I was hesitating saying it, and thank you, Ed, for jumping in there. But yeah, that's been my experience. It has absolutely flown by. And I think it is that rapid change. Things have been forced on us. We've had to change, and it's been done very, very quickly compared to previous years. So, yeah, I mean, it's always has its challenges, but it's about the strength of people around you. And, if you've got a strong team, and thankfully I do around me, then you share in those difficult moments, problem shared, as they say, and all that.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, I'd agree completely with that. I think it's kind of quite startling to think that it's almost a year since we first all started working from home. It's kind of, well, at times it's been a very hard year, but it's amazing how the last year has flown by. So yeah, I would agree completely with that. Okay, move on to our next question, which is an interesting one. I'll start off with Alan, please, on this one. Any specific lessons learned from the past year on how to lead remotely? So obviously you're all in the position of kind of leading your firms. Any lessons that you've taken away on kind of how best to lead firms whilst working from home?
Well, the mantra, of course, in our industry is location, location, location. Nowadays, it's communication, communication, communication. And if you stop keeping in touch with people, that's a real challenge. So what we've certainly seen is differentiation between people that are engaged through this medium and those that need to be kind of brought more rapidly into it. And just keeping in touch, I think that's so important here. Those casual conversations that used to happen around the coffee machine, trying how to replicate those in a remote way of working. In terms of habit forming, though, I think it's fair to say that we're all missing the commute. And I know that sounds a bit of a daft thing to say, but a process of transition between home and work, which used to happen either on a train or in walking or cycling into an office building, that's gone. And that point at which you change your mindset has disappeared. And trying to kind of replicate that in a remote working is a real challenge. And flip side is switching off, getting people to actually stop work. When does work end if it's constantly around you, and the number of communications happening at weekend and so on. So really trying to kind of build in those good habits that we used to have into this remote working, taking a break, a virtual commute of some sort, even if it's just walk around the block before you start work. We've seen a huge growth in the number of dogs, I think, because everyone's taking a dog out for a walk, aren't they? But seriously, I think it is very much around leadership by keeping in touch with people. Communication, for me, is the key thing.
Thanks, Alan. Maureen?
Well, I'd build on what I totally agree, communication. And then I would then just add to that, it's the sort of, which is the same part really, which is about the people and people. And that actually we are all human, we're all human businesses, and we love that social connectivity. And I think the well-being point, and it sort of builds on what you were saying, Alan, is that I don't think there's a difference between work and life. They're the same. So therefore, you may have to make sure that the well-being of people is just as important as getting the job done, and that interconnectivity of the two, so that actually, that you're sort of actually making sure that people we're sort of slightly more involved in our people's whole life, not just when they come into the office, but actually responsible for their well-being and their welfare throughout what they're doing, and that interactivity of how they're coping with their children and how they're coping with the work and their personal life, and allowing that all to be much more blended, I think, but making sure that people are taking those breaks and actually building on their well-being, because actually, and that we have to show we're doing it too, because if we don't do it and all our people don't do it, then actually we're actually sort of showing a bad example, because actually we will only be high performing if we've got people who are well looked after.
Thanks, Maureen. I was going to say leading by example, but I probably should say leading by good example. Okay, thank you. All right, so move on to our next question. I think we'll start off with Ed on this one, and it's kind of slightly related, but question is, what new skills and competencies do your partners or other team leaders need to cope with the new ways of working? I'm thinking particularly around how they might work with teams in mixed locations and how they avoid favouring people with whom they might have more regular contact in the office, for example. So I suppose kind of what new skills have partners needed to kind of cope with remote working and running a team?
Well, I think there's a broader issue there. Is do we want all partners to all be the same thing? And I think probably we're starting to see now where we are carving out different roles for different people within our business and trying to make the role or the skill sets match the roles that people have got, rather than saying you're a partner, therefore you must do X, Y, and Z. Say, well, actually you're a partner, you're good at X and Y, but you're useless at Z, so we're not going to give you Z to do. We're going to give you X and Y to work on. But to answer the question more directly, we've got some partners who are very good at training their staff by osmosis, and others who are very good at proactively training their staff. And of course, the ones who train by osmosis are the ones who've suffered during this remote way of working. They normally just have somebody sat around next to them, and they rely on the person next to them being observant and picking up the habits of the person whilst they get on with their day job. And that skill set is completely useless and defunct in the current working arrangements. And then we've got other people within our business who were very keen to make sure they did pick up on a regular basis, not just from the work skills, but also the mental health well-being, picking up on Maureen's point a bit earlier, communicating well. And it comes back, as you say, it does come back to that communication. But I think also being mindful of not just communicating, but the language you use in the communications. And I think that's, again, something we've all picked up as we've gone along. I mean, funny enough, I did a post to my staff about the powers and the benefits of being positive on exactly the same day that the KPMG guy put out his communication about stop moaning. Broadly speaking, I think they're the same take. They're just different, coming at it from different angles. One coming at it from a very positive. So I think actually those staff who can communicate, but communicate well in a positive way, are the ones showing themselves to be the people who are put into that leading others positions. That doesn't mean to say we haven't got a role for partners who are otherwise better at other things, but it's sort of moving away from this, you're a partner, therefore you must do all of these things, to identifying what people's strengths are and putting them into those roles that match those strengths.
Thank you, Ed. And again, happy to open that question up to the rest of our panel. Alan?
Well, I was just going to say, I think it's not all one size fits all, is it? Every single person we're dealing with here is a different individual, and all the circumstances around that are different. And however much you might think you can group people together, it's that kind of empathy and understanding that can really develop. One of my new words is triangles, and maybe it's inspired by football, but knocking the ball around between three people, it seems to me that's quite a good way of working. If you build up those triangles between groups of three, you've got very effective working operational groups, each one gradually cascading into larger groups. And it's trying to keep in touch regularly with people is so crucial in here, and not forgetting about somebody and suddenly think, oh, I haven't spoken to them for a month. You need to have that connection going on. And in that respect, I really value the fact that we've got people in our organisation that we didn't have, again, 2 or 3 years ago, who are doing some of this work. So, we used to have a lot of sort of joint working finance director and HR roles, for example. We've now separated those out. We're fortunate enough to be big enough to start to be able to do those sorts of things. And that process of having someone with a real specialist skill set to fill in the gaps, which I think, picking up Ed's point, partners are all different. They all have different skill sets, and some don't recognise their weaknesses, myself included. And you need someone to point those out to you and sort it out.
Okay.
I would say that whilst I totally agree all partners have got different things to do, but they all have a responsibility of leadership and to inspire their teams in however they do that. So I think that we've all been learning more, and we've been doing sort of wellbeing and mind training for our partners as well as to how to deal with people. And I think we've all had to learn you know, even the ones that maybe are not the best at it, but in terms of that use of language point, which was very aptly displayed in the press fairly recently, as Ed said. So whilst I accept all partners have got different roles and different things to do, there is one absolute piece, which is they are all leaders and they have to inspire our people, because that's an ultimate responsibility alongside their business building and whatever they're delivering.
I would certainly support that wholeheartedly, Maureen. I think the point is, for our business, we've grown from when I took over, sort of 250 odd staff to 300 plus, and we've become a different size business. But historically, a majority of our equity partners have been feeling in at the coalface, working partners, for want of a better word. But now, given the size, that responsibility, as you say, even more so now, having got through a very, very difficult year or so, they need to be leaders. And I think that is a very, very good point. And everyone has to find their own way to be a good leader, but it is focusing on leading, managing people, manage them well.
Thank you, Paul. We'll move on to the next question. It's a very specific question, very much kind of following on from the very first question that I asked Ed at the start. But if I can start off with Paul, trying to keep it in the order we've been going through. So, do you see a reduction in the kind of number of office desks per square metre, kind of going forward, and the greater use of Zoom rooms?
Sorry, did you say me, John? I thought you did.
Yes, please.
Yeah, sorry, yeah. I do. Quite how far that will go, I don't know. I think it will vary from our offices. Talking about our own situation, if you took our London office as an example, it's very much of a hub. It's where our clients, partners, suppliers that we work with like to migrate towards, because it's so convenient. So that perhaps has a more of a focus on being extending it out beyond what it perhaps has done up to now. And yeah, I mean, I think, Ed, you talked very well about what you're doing in Norwich. You're a Norwich office there. I see us having to do the same thing. You know, you want more breakout areas. And then you talked about possibly more cellular. I think there's a combination of everything. I think there would be more demand on different types of areas being provided within the office, so that, you know, we can carry on giving the flexibility to people, so that, you know, if colleagues are talking, they don't all have to be in the office to do that team meeting. Some can be remote, some can be in the office, but it might mean having to have some breakout areas and the like. So inevitably, I think that will mean a reduction on workstations. And of course, the demands will probably go down, because of, you know, people perhaps, so again, to Ed's experience, might only want to be coming in twice a week. Well, that whole utilisation of an office desk, if someone's, you know, owns a desk, that's an awful lot of space to take up just to allow someone to come in once or twice a week. So yes, of course, I think inevitably for better use of our space, and avoid, of course, having to create too many new offices. Why wouldn't we want to change the way we use that office area?
Thank you, Paul. I think we'll move on to the next question, which is kind of slightly related. So this question's for Maureen. So very specifically about agile working, I guess, really. So is the distracted nature of home working better for the staff, i.e. taking short breaks from the laptop to load the dishwasher, empty the washing machine, etc., compared to the pressure cooker of the work environment?
I don't know. I mean, I think if you think about it, in the work environment, you do have those breaks. You might not be loading your dishwasher, but you're certainly having a chat next to the coffee machine or passing in the corridor. So I think it's just different mixes of space. And to be honest, you know, if it is convenient for somebody to work at home and they've got a few chores to do, does it matter? It really doesn't. I think, you know, it's about outputs, not just input, you know, what time you're sitting at the desk. So, yeah, I think, I mean, the agile working will allow people to be working at home when the delivery man's coming, or they've got to do something at home. But they'll still, you know, I think the overall will still end up back in the same place, which is that they'll get their job done. And I think people, you know, this has created the barriers before, where people had this issue about trust in some ways, I think, whereas this has made it clear you can trust people. You know, you have good people who work for you, and you have to trust them and reciprocate, then they will reciprocate. And therefore, you know, a few hours out here or there to do something convenient, you know, they often come back and do it something else later at night. I think it is really about, the future is making sure that the balance between your work and your home all works for you, your family and everything. You have to be a whole person.
Thank you, Maureen. Thank you. Next question for Alan. It's quite a positive question in many ways. Are you expecting to benefit from the £250 billion of pent-up demand that apparently will benefit the UK economy once lockdown is lifted?
It's a great question, isn't it? And I'm sure there's lots in the hospitality sector who are just can't wait to get out there. The nature of our business, though, probably falls outside of those immediately affected areas. But I think what we might see, we'll talk about stamp duty here for a moment, will we see a continued confidence in the housing market? And that's probably a question for you guys rather than for me. But that will have a big effect, I think, on our future workload. The way our work is funded is absolutely dependent on the private sector contribution into it, whether that's public housing in some form or private housing exclusively. And so if there is that pent-up demand and it flows into the housing market, then yes, will be the answer.
Okay, thank you very much, Alan. Given the time is quickly disappearing, I think we'll move on to the next question. It's a slight change of tack here, so a little bit different. So this question for Ed. I'm interested to hear the panel's strategies to promote the importance of climate change among their clients ahead of COP26. So all about climate change.
Interesting question. Now, it's probably one I'm not the best place to answer. A large chunk of our client base probably would see it as an irrelevance. Injury service work that we do for people who've suffered personal injuries or clinical negligence claims, or our private clients, they probably haven't got that on their agenda. From a business perspective, obviously we're very keen to capitalise on some of the changes that we've put in place, reducing travel and things like that. The honest answer is I don't do any client work directly myself, and therefore I would probably have to defer to my business law group and the head of that group as to what initiatives they're putting in place, and I'm not close enough to them to be able to answer that one myself.
Thank you, Ed. Maureen?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that certainly it's something that is really was moving up our agenda pre-COVID, sort of got lost a little bit in the COVID and is now back up there really. And we're accountants, so measuring that and being able to measure the impact of people on the on climate, and some of the reporting is now starting to have the requirement to measure those changes. So I suppose ours is trying to look at the whole. Quite a difficult thing to understand our own personal impact as a firm of accountants on the environment, but certainly we're trying to measure it. We're doing a project at the moment to say, if everybody's making these big statements about going to be carbon neutral by a certain date, and I'd love to be able to say that, but I don't know how. So trying to actually engage with people and learn how can you do it, and to sort of analyze what we are doing now and what our impact is. And for the first time we had to do that in our annual report. So now my challenge is that when we get to next year, I've got to be able to compare it. So certainly it's not necessarily ahead of COP26. It's something that's been coming from our people. Now we're also, in a number of our clients, we do quite a lot in the not-for-profit sector, and it's certainly within some of their RFPs, etc., wanting to understand. So I think the more that it's measured across the business community and we have to contribute in that way, I think then we'll all be hopefully just moving the dial a little bit. But I have to say at this point, at the moment with no traveling and all of that stuff, I think it's helping. But it's a plea to find out how we can help more. And that's what we're trying to do with our people and our sort of green committee internally.
Thank you, Maureen. Alan?
I'll just amplify from our perspective. I've got a bid in front of me at the moment with 7 questions. 3 of them are on sustainability. And that's consistent with a pattern that's been going on for years, long ahead of COP26. It's a really crucial issue in our industry. Sadly, and this is another of my favourite phrases, we only insulate our buildings because the government tells us we have to. So until we see government legislation that levels the playing field, you will still see people paying lip service to this, I'm afraid. And we've got to see a really stronger regulatory regime. And I think perhaps through the review of the building safety legislation that Paul's mentioned already, we might see something around this. But unfortunately, we do seem to be a little bit behind the curve, despite good intentions, particularly in local authorities.
Thank you, Alan. I think we've just got 2 more questions, so we'll try and just get those in before we finish. So first question is, do firm leaders need to model agile working, assuming that's being adopted over the longer term, or should we be in the office? So very much following on from kind of previous questions about agile working, but and I definitely have lost the plot as to where I am with the panel. So who would like to go first on that one?
I'm happy to jump in, and I think actually it's a blend that we need to be here. I mean, at the end of the day, if you go completely agile as a leader and you're not seen in the office at all, then are you really leading? But at the same time, if you're going into the office just for the sake of being in the office, then you're not demonstrating the behaviours you want. So I think it's making sure that you are utilising your time as effectively and efficiently as possible, and in doing so, demonstrating the behaviours you want your staff to follow. So I would quite happily still work from home where I don't have any meetings to go to or a reason to be in an office, but I would also quite like to be in a position where I am visibly seen around our different offices from time to time as the leader of that business, so that people know they can. I think our staff have got used to the idea that they can pick up the phone, they can look in my diary's open, and they can stick in meetings to me whenever they like. But there are some staff that are very keen to take up that offer, and there are other staff who are very reticent to trouble the CEO. Whereas actually, if you're walking around the place and they see you there, then they might be willing to ask you a question. So I think we've got to be mindful of all the types of people we've got and all of our behaviours, and say it's a blend, I think.
Thank you.
I would just comment that I absolutely agree with Ed, but I think it's important as we go through an early stage change of trying to enforce agile working, that as leaders, we have to demonstrate it, because no matter what we say, people look at what we do. And if we are in the office 5 days a week, long hours, and I have to say I was one of those guilt people that's how I've, worked for a long time. But I think that then we do not empower our people to follow our lead, really. And that's what leadership is about. So I think we have to demonstrate it ourselves.
Thanks, Maureen. Just conscious of time, I will try and fit in our last question. So what compliance implications are you seeing from the new remote ways of working, and what regulatory interest have you seen in these so far? And if maybe I could start with Paul on that one.
Yeah, unless things are changed in a matter of days, the official position from the HSE is that you don't have to do your desk working space assessments working remotely as things stand. But I do think that will change because if it becomes a norm that we are going to be agile or flexible working arrangements, then I think it's going to be as important for people to be set up as well at home as they are in the office space. And that brings further challenges in terms of how responsible the employer is in that regard. I know from my own experience, I wasn't set up particularly well in my office here at home. I started to get, shoulder and all sorts of, difficulties because I didn't have a mouse and all the rest of it. It's all those things we take for granted in the office space that people have been struggling with. So I think legislation will deal with that in due course, because I think we've gone past that period where the pandemic's allowed it to be a state of emergency. You're allowed to get away with it, so to speak. And I think only rightly so. I mean, you still got to think about people's well-being and their health. And you don't want people struggling. That's the bottom line. So yeah, I'm sure that legislation will change soon enough.
Thank you, Paul. Anything from anybody else? Any kind of comments about maybe confidentiality or anything like that?
Well, I was just going to mention that we could do some changes in the tax laws, actually, John, and maybe you guys could do something about that. So we could buy staff equipment without it suddenly becoming a benefit in kind. I mean, it's absolutely bonkers, this. So we can ship stuff out of our office and they can stick it in a corner if they've got a corner, but they can't go and buy a desk without it suddenly becoming a piece of their domestic furniture. It's crazy. I'll pass on the other question to Maureen.
I'm afraid we don't have the solution on that one, I'm afraid. We've got the same challenge for all of us. And as a regulatory point, that certainly one we've had to focus on is the data privacy and client confidentiality, and not trying to stop people printing things at home, to be honest, because that is not as secure as in the office when you've got a secure mailing. And of course, from a regulatory point of view, we've also got the ICAW and our audit regime. And when we certainly had to suddenly go to remote auditing overnight, there were some sure challenges that we've had to put quite a lot of effort into making sure we're complying. And as they've been issuing new guidance almost every week to make sure that our processes and procedures have stayed with it. So it's been a different view of regulation, I would say there.
Thank you, Maureen. And that's worked out perfectly in that we've answered all the questions from our audience just in time, and we've just gone 1 minute past 1 o'clock. So it just only remains for me to thank you very much say thank you very much to all our panel. So thank you, Maureen, Ed, Alan and Paul. I really, really enjoyed that discussion today. I'm sure all our audience did. And I'd just like to finish by thanking everybody that's tuned into today's webinar. So thank you very much.